What's up everybody, Steven here with Neural DSP. And today I'm gonna take you through a breakdown of the tones used in the latest Artist Tones cover of Meshuggah. For this Artist Tones cover, I did things a little bit differently and I did a top 5 tracks voted on by you guys. If that's something that you guys enjoyed and you wanna see more of, go ahead and leave comments down below and let me know your thoughts. And big thanks to Medeiros for supplying me a couple of rhythm and lead tracks to use on this cover. I greatly appreciate it, dude. You'll find his socials in links down in the description below. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in. So let's go ahead and start moving through our guitar tracks. First up is Obzen, which ended up having 6 different guitar layers. So as you can see, I went with a straightforward setup on this particular track using 6 instances of the Fortin Nameless. Each pairing of the Fortin Nameless uses different settings because I wanted to use each pair to give me a certain part of the frequency spectrum. And I'll go through each one so you can hear the difference between the pairs. You can hear that the first pair is very warm, very mid-heavy. The next one's gonna be a little bit more sizzly, and the last pair is very, very bright. Now let's go ahead and go through the impulse responses first. On the first set, I went with the Dynamic 57 and the Dynamic 906. The second pairing, I went with Dynamic 906, Ribbon 160, and the last example, I went with the Dynamic 421 and the Condenser 184. As with the periphery mix that I did a couple of weeks back, I used a time adjuster and adjusted the right track back just a couple of samples, so that way I could clear out a little bit of that presence area, make it a little bit less bright. And then I have the down mixer plugin, which is just simply to pull my left and right stereo channel back into mono. And then I have Pro Q3 doing a little bit of shaping and a little bit of presence control. Now, pretty much on all of these, I ended up using the Fortin grind instead of the hex drive, because the hex drive was just giving me a little bit too much mid-range, a little bit too much mud, and the grind really helped scoop out too much of that low end that was starting to kind of pile up in the mix. Now, the reason why I went with 6 guitar tracks is because 4 just felt a little bit too weak when compared to the original track. So if I cut out this second pairing and just used mine and Joao's guitars, it sounds pretty good, but not quite as impactful as having 6. Really gives it a whole lot of girth that you really want with this track. Moving up to my guitar bus, I used a little bit of shaping EQ, and I was having some problems with a couple of whistly areas, especially when you have 6 guitars. A lot of those problem areas are going to compound on each other, so you have to be really careful with your surgical moves to keep that presence area under control. After that, because this is so palm mute heavy, I have a multiband compressor, kind of just controlling that low range. Because as that low end blooms after those little chugs, the dilla dilla dilla, and this is there just to make sure that it doesn't overwhelm the rest of my mix. After that, I'm using Soothe. I have the sharpness and selectivity up to maximum, stereo link is off, and this is mainly just so I can kind of clear up the presence area and make sure that it doesn't get too whistly. Finally, I have the SSL EQ just giving me a 1.04 dB and a 2 dB boost at 3.5 kilohertz and 8 kilohertz. And I'm mainly using this SSL EQ just for broad strokes, just to brighten up the tracks just a little bit without making it too whistly. So let's take a look at New Millennium Cyanide Christ. Again, I went with the Fortin Nameless on all of these. Probably the significant difference between this one and the previous instances is I used the Fortin Hex Drive instead of the grind. I recorded this on my Hoppa 7 string, which is pretty bright as is, so I didn't need to scoop out a whole lot of the low end with the Fortin grind. You can hear when the grind is activated, it really just makes it too thin for the mix. So now moving up to my bus processing, I do more shaping with this one as well as a cut around 3400 hertz. I do a low pass at 11 kilohertz. Soothe is on similar settings as the previous bus as well as the Pro MB. And then I also have the SSL EQ. I didn't go for quite as big a boost on the higher band though. So if you listen to bus processing on this active and inactive, let's listen to how it sounds. Lastly, I kept the impulse responses on this particular example very simple. I just went with the dynamic 57, and that was it because I got all I really wanted out of that 57. Next up, at number 3 is Do Not Look Down. I went with a similar setup on the first pair of guitars on this track using the Fortin Nameless and the time adjuster to adjust the right channel back a couple of samples to give myself a little bit darker sound. For the second set of guitars, I went with the Archetype Abasi third head. I didn't add the Pathos pedal, which I thought I might, but I ended up getting enough gain and grit out of this head that I didn't really need to. For the impulse response, I just stuck to a single dynamic 57. When we take a look at the bus processing, I have some more shaping of the low, mids, and mid-range. I had some real troubles with this chirping kind of frequency around 3500 hertz, and I had to get rid of all of it. After that, I copied and pasted the settings for the Soothe over to this track. And then I used the Abbey Roads TG mastering chain to give myself a little bit of spread as well as a little bit of EQ shaping, and that's about it. So if you listen to my bus processing off and on, it'll sound like this. Coming in at number 2, we have Demiurge. And again, this was similarly set up to the previous track, Do Not Look Down, by using a combination of the Fortin Nameless and the Archetype Abasi third head. So let's go ahead and listen to these two tracks, and we'll go ahead and listen to them in and out of context. My bus processing was pretty simple on this one. Again, I'm using Soothe to control that high-end presence, and I'm using Pro Q3 to do some shaping. as well as some, again, that 3400, 3500 hertz range was really giving my ears troubles towards the end of this mix. So I ended up cutting that pretty aggressively. Finally, the #1 track that you guys voted to be on this list, Bleed. This one was hard on the right hand. Holy crap. Again, I go with Fortin Nameless, and this time I went with the Fortin NTS. Now, the reason why I went with the NTS is because the specific saturation of the top end afforded by the NTS really got me that bite that I was looking for to kind of cut through the mix with this. I got the majority of my tone from the Fortin Nameless plugin, which again is going to Dynamic 57, Condenser 184, very similar setup to the previous tracks, using the Fortin grind. Now you can see that I had to pump the Fortin grind up pretty considerably to get the amount of saturation that I needed. The reason being is that these DIs ended up being a lot quieter than the previous ones, only because the picking technique kept me from really digging into the strings. Now, as we listen, you'll notice that I use the Nameless as the majority of my tone, and then the Fortin NTS is really kind of cutting through and just adding a little bit of girth and top end to the majority of the tone. When we go to my bus processing, I have the Pro Q3 as normal, doing a lot of the shaping. I ended up having to boost the top end just a little bit with Pro Q3. I turned on the Saturn and gave a little bit of warm tape saturation and took a little bit off the treble from 303 hertz and above. And then I used my SSL EQ to brighten up the top end. Let's go ahead and listen to this in context with the bus processing on and off. Now moving on to the lead guitars, these were supplied by João Medeiros. Thanks, man. To start off, I went with the Fortin Nameless pretty much on my Frederick settings, which were taken from the user manual of the physical version of the Nameless. I ended up using Quadravox to give myself a couple of harmonies, a fourth down and an octave down. And then I opened up the Archetype Corey Wong and used the delay and the wash pedal to give my leads a little bit more lush sound. And then Pro Q3 just to take out 3300 hertz. And that's how I dialed in the guitar tones for the Artist Tones Meshuggah top 5 user voted tracks. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Presets to all the tones used in this video are in a link in the description down below. While you're there, leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for notifications on when we upload new content to this channel. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.